It's me, Callie. Welcome to Kendra, or welcome back to Kendra. Channel's Kendra. I'm Callie. Today we're going to be analyzing a poem that I like. It's this poem, in case you were wondering. It's the one I have written down on a big notepad. So this is the poem Once by the Pacific by Robert Frost. It was published in 1926. So first I'm just going to read the poem, and then I'm going to take you through how I analyzed this poem, and then I'm going to take you through how I dissected this poem and what it made me think of. And yeah, I just really like this poem, so I'm going to talk about it. Okay, so here's the poem. Once by the Pacific. The shattered water made a misty din. Great waves looked over at others coming in and thought of doing something to the shore that water never did to land before. The clouds were low and hairy in the skies, like locks blown forward in the gleam of eyes. You could not tell, and yet it looked as if the shore was lucky in being backed by cliff, the cliff in being backed by continent. It looked as if a night of dark intent was coming, and not only a night, an age. Someone had better be prepared for rage. There would be more than ocean water broken before God's last put out the light was spoken. Snaps. The first thing I do when I am analyzing a poem is I number the lines because it makes it so much easier. Okay, that looks really fucking ugly, but we're gonna do it. And we count how many lines there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 14 lines. Uh-oh, you know what that means? All 4 of my subscribers knew exactly what that meant. It means it's a sonnet. Now, the next thing you do when you're analyzing a poem, rhyme scheme. Next thing you do is look for any words you don't know. I know what all these words mean. I don't know what words you don't know. The word that I think people might not know is this word, the word din. A loud, unpleasant noise. That's a din. Next thing I like to do is look for stuff like alliteration. The shattered water made a misty din. Made misty. We're gonna underline it. Great waves looked over others coming in. You could say over others. We're gonna underline it just to be fun. Something, shore, like, locks. Being backed by. Being backed by. Better be. I think we got the gist of it. Next thing that's really important, especially with modern poets, which Frost, he's a modern poet. We'll talk more about that later. But basically, a lot of the writers at the time used a lot of allusions because they were academic, rich kids who went to Harvard. I don't know. They were pretentious fucks, that's what they were. But you always want to look for allusions, especially in a modern poem. This is a modern poem. It was written in 1926 by Robert Frost. So, it's kind of hard to find allusions if you don't know that something is an allusion, or if you don't know the reference. In this poem, what we do have is this capital P right there. Do you see that? That capital P put out the light. Now, this is a sonnet. And you want to know who famously wrote a lot of sonnets? Shakespeare. William Shakespeare. Shakespeare. He wrote a lot of sonnets. Put out the light, that's very familiar when it comes to Shakespeare. Why? It's hard to write on the easel. Othello. He wrote a play called Othello. And in Othello, there is a monologue by Othello, the character, and it's all about this idea of putting out the light. Put out the light. That's an allusion to Shakespeare. So, in Act 5 of Othello, the play Othello, the character Othello is in Desdemona's room. And it's the middle of the night, and he has a candle, and it's the only light in the room. Desdemona has been accused of infidelity. And Othello is like, I kind of want to kill Desdemona. And he goes on this whole monologue about putting out the light. And it's a double meaning. He is both referencing the candle in the room, putting out the light of the candle, and also putting out Desdemona's light, i.e. killing her. He's talking about killing her. So we know this is an allusion to killing people. So we have an allusion right here. Everything else, there's nothing that's an obvious allusion just yet, but right now we have an allusion. Also, the name of the poem is Once by the Pacific. The Pacific what? The Pacific Ocean. Once by the Pacific Ocean. So we already know from the title that this is about something that happened once near the ocean. So now we're just going to kind of go line by line and kind of figure out what he's talking about. The shattered water. I'm not going to go on. We already have so much to say. Shattered water. Okay, so shattered is, what does that mean? That means broken. That means taken apart in tiny pieces, breaking apart. Shattered has this like kind of negative connotation, this kind of violent connotation. Something being shattered, you throwing something against the wall, you throwing water against the sand and it's shattering. That's kind of a violent image. First three words, we already have this sense of violence. The shattered water made a misty din. Okay, so we already established a din is a loud, unpleasant noise. A loud noise you don't like. The noise is unpleasant. You don't like it. This is again going into this idea of like maybe something bad's going on, you know, something's being shattered, a loud, uncomfortable noise being made, like we don't like it, it's a ruckus, something that we don't like is going on or is coming, you know, something's wrong, okay? What he's talking about here is he's talking about waves crashing on the beach. You know, the wave comes up and it goes down and all of the little water particles spread out, you know? And we have this word misty, you know, because when you're at the beach and you're walking along the shore and the waves come in and they crash, there's a little bit of mist, there's a little bit of water that gets spout out into the air and there's mist. So that's what he's talking about. He's talking about waves crashing on the sand. But they're not just crashing on the sand, the water is shattering. The water is being broken, which we've already established is negative, maybe even violent, because how do you shatter something? You have to put effort into shattering it, you know? You don't just break glass by touching it. You break glass by throwing it against the wall. So we have this kind of violent thing going on here, and there's mist coming out, and the mist is making this loud noise, or the waves crashing is making this loud noise, but not just a loud noise, it's making mist in the air, so it's making this misty din. You already have this sense of synesthesia with this mix of touch, misty, and also sight, seeing the water splash, the water go everywhere, misty, and sound, din. Loud noise. So we have this sense of synesthesia, which is really cool. Yeah, so just in this first line alone, you know, what is this? 7 words? In the first 7 words of this poem, the first line, we already have this really cool image and this really cool vibe going on. Just a really cool vibe, this like violent, rough waves. So cool. Okay, the shattered water made a misty din. We already have this like very vibrant image going on in our head. We can hear it, we can feel it, we can see it, we can put connotation on it. Like we already have this like, just in the first line. We have another 13 lines, so that's a lot. Great waves looked over others coming in, and thought of doing something to the shore that water never did to land before. Great waves looking over others. Confirms our beach scene with waves. It's not just random shattered water, it is waves crashing on the beach. So we have these big, they're called great waves, they're looking over others. You kind of have the sense of like the curvature of the wave, but also they're looking over the ones before it. meaning that each wave is getting bigger than the last. So you have like this, not just this like kind of violent thing going on with the water shattering, but now you have the waves getting bigger and bigger as each new wave comes in. So you have this idea of like, maybe there's some rough water going on. There's some high waves, there's some rough waves, maybe there's a storm. He looked over others coming in and thought of doing something to the shore that water never did to land before. So then you have personification. You have personification of the waves. You know, the waves, personification, you probably know what that is. I'm not going to explain it to you. I really want to, but I'm not going to because you're not a 4-year-old. You know what personification is. I just get really nerdy and I want to explain everything. It's fine. It's fine. We don't need to talk about it. We have this personification of the waves. The waves are looking, which waves don't have eyes, you know. You have this personification of the waves, which is really interesting because you have shattered waves, going back to shattered waves. So we already have this negative connotation of what is happening, what is going on with the waves. The waves are shattering, that they're looking over others, they're getting higher and higher. There may be rough waves. So you have rough waves, maybe a storm coming, and now the waves are thinking of doing something. Are the waves angry? Now that we've personified the waves, are they angry? Is that why they're being rough? Is that why they're growing higher and higher, greater and greater? Is that why they're shattering against the sand, making loud, uncomfortable noises? Is that why? I don't know. Thought of doing something to the shore that water never did to land before. It never did to land before. This is going to be a new thing that's going on. So we have this kind of idea of something is building, and that something is something that's never happened before. What's going on? We don't know. We're a little uncertain. The clouds were low and hairy in the skies, like locks blown forward in the gleam of eyes. So we have a very interesting visual here of the clouds. The clouds are hairy, like cotton balls, or like hair. This very tactile way of describing something that really, like, it's just a really interesting way. I don't know. I really like that image. I really like that idea. And then he brings that simile back. He completes the simile with the clouds are hairy like locks blown forward. Like locks of hair blown forward. Hairy, like your little frizzy hairs. Like, oh, like frizzy hairs, frizzy baby hairs. I have those. Oh my god, that's an incredible way to describe a cloud. The clouds are low. They're low. They're you know, we already have this idea of the waves are getting rougher, the water is being loud and possibly a little bit violent, and then we have the clouds are low. You know, low clouds, that's kind of sounds like storm clouds. Like locks blown forward in the gleam of eyes, you know, kind of like when you're standing in the wind and you have longer hair and the wind is like pushing your hair all into your face and you can't see anything, you have to keep pushing your hair back. Like locks blown forward in the gleam of eyes, you can't see anything. It's all hazy from the clouds. You can't see anything because the hair's in the way, because the clouds are in the way, the clouds are low. It's misty, there's low clouds. It's kind of obstructing your view of what is out in the ocean. What is the ocean? What is out there? And why is it causing these rough waves on the beach, you know? You could not tell, and yet it looked as if the shore was lucky in being backed by cliff, the cliff in being backed by continent. So here we have pathetic fallacy with this idea of the shore being lucky. Does the shore feel lucky? Does it look lucky to us? Do we think it's lucky? Maybe the cliff feeling lucky, being lucky. This kind of goes into this idea of water versus land, because we have the water shattering, they're crashing on the waves, they're shattering on, not to crash, they're crashing on the sand, they're shattering on the sand. The water's thinking of doing, it's never done to land before, and the land is lucky in being backed by cliff, like thank God I'm not alone, thank God I have backup, and the cliff is like thank God I have backup, that's fucking scary. The land is like maybe scared of the water, and the water's angry, and it's kind of hurting the shore right now, but it's gonna get worse. It's not truly at full anger yet, because it's only thinking of the water's only thinking of doing something to the land. It hasn't actually done it yet. And there's a few different things that the water and the land could maybe symbolize. Frost likes to take microcosmic scenes, microcosm being small, a microcosmic scene like a storm coming in one night, and use it to talk about a larger thing or larger theme or a more macrocosmic event, which means a big event. So maybe the water and the land are symbols, maybe they're not, maybe they're both a symbol and a physical storm that's happening. So you have the shore and the cliff feeling lucky, but kind of implying that they're also feeling scared. They're lucky that they have backup, maybe because they're scared of the water. They're scared of what the water's going to do. But yeah, so you're kind of getting this sense of a fight brewing. Some kind of conflict. It's going to be violent, and it's going to be bad, and it's going to be scary. It looked as if a night of dark intent was coming, but not only a night, an age. So here, that idea of maybe something's coming, it's confirmed. Something is coming. It looked as if a night of dark intent was coming. It's coming. And not only a night, an age. This idea of this small-scale scene that we're watching, the storm brewing on the ocean. But now it says a night is coming. So now we have a time of day. The speaker is on the beach at sunset. Night is coming. But not just a night of dark intent was coming. An age of dark intent is coming. Dark intent, evil, human savagery from the biblical times when God wanted to kill everyone, maybe that. Something bad is going to happen. Something bad it's on its way. So this is kind of where we can first start seeing the pieces of the second illusion in the poem. We pointed out this illusion at the very end, put out the light, being an allusion to Othello, and putting out the light is the symbol of, is like referencing killing someone. It's a turn of phrase, I guess, for killing someone or something. But there's actually a second illusion going on in this poem. It's not quite as obvious, and it's more so you have to read the whole poem than to understand it, rather than it being just one line that is like a quote or as a word or something like that. It's kind of like overall this poem reminds you of something. A storm at sea, water doing something it's never done to land before. Water's coming in, maybe it's coming onto the land, maybe it's flooding. Now what's a very memorable flood? It's Noah's Ark. In the story from the Bible, God is preparing to flood the earth and kill everything and everyone because humanity has become horrible and savage. God tells Noah, the one good man left, to build a boat and fill it with his family members and 2 of every kind of animal so that God can start humanity over with Noah's family. Once Noah builds the ark and puts all of the animals on it, God floods the lands and drowns everyone else. So, the poem is alluding to another dark time where humans were so awful to each other that God wanted to kill us, the nature wanted to kill us through drowning. So, we know the story of Noah's Ark, and we've already talked about the water being angry at the land. And we've already talked about the water and the land maybe being symbols. Maybe the water is God's wrath, and the land is humans. Just like when God flooded the land back in biblical times. The water is getting ready to flood the land again. Something it's never done to land before. Something the water hasn't done in a very long time. And maybe if you don't believe that story in the Bible to be true, maybe the water never has done this to land before. I don't know. This storm is representative of the whole evilness the speaker feels is about to come. But we don't know what it is, because the clouds are low and hairy, like locks blown forward. So we can't see what it is that is in the distance. We can't see it. We just know that it's headed our way, which is kind of scary, kind of terrifying. Someone had better be prepared for rage. Whose rage? Whose rage do we need to be prepared for? We don't know whose rage. We don't know whose rage this is. There's a few different possibilities. We've talked about Noah's Ark, so maybe it's God's rage. Maybe it's the water's rage, because we've already seen that the water's feeling kind of angry. Or maybe even human rage towards other humans. Because what happened that made God so angry at the humans that he wanted to kill them all? They were evil. They were evil and they were killing each other already. So maybe it's humans raging at each other. We also have this idea of nature's rage, the water being angry not just at the land, but at humans. Maybe the water, the nature itself is angry at humans for mistreating it or something. Water being nature, land being humans. The speaker implying and putting the feelings of look and fear onto the land while it passively stands there. The land is not doing anything in this poem. All it's doing is passively, possibly feeling lucky. While the water's doing things, the water is shattering, the water is, wave after wave coming in. The water is the one being violent and angry here. So the water is active, but the land is pretty passive. So maybe it's nature raging against humans. But maybe it's a reflection of ourselves. Water, it's clear, it's reflective. Maybe it's the water, the waves, the storm is reflecting what is going on in humans. Nature reflecting our own anger and rage back to us, human versus human, just like I was saying. But at the end of the day, we don't know whose rage the speaker is talking about. We don't know whose rage Frost is talking about. All we know is that someone better be prepared for it. We don't know who needs to be prepared. It might be me, it might be you, it might be us, it might not be us, it might be someone else. We don't know who. Someone. He doesn't know what's coming. He doesn't know who's angry at who. He doesn't know who's going to be violent towards who. All he knows is that something is coming. I don't know what it is, but it's coming, and it's scary. There's this uncertainty for this thing that the water's preparing for, the water's thinking about. There's this uncertainty for what's going to happen. We can't see the clouds. We can't see out into the distance of the ocean. It's hazy. We can't see out to the distance of the future. There's an uncertainty here, but there's a dread for the future in that uncertainty. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be something bad. There would be more than ocean water broken before God's last put out the light was spoken. So here we have a direct reference to God. Before we were talking, the biblical story, you kind of just have to know of the biblical story to really get the reference. But here we have God's name right there. Direct reference to God, which now that we're talking about God, now this Noah's Ark thing really come together. And when was the last time God used a flood? To kill everyone with Noah's Ark. Yeah. And we have God's last put out the light. God's put out the light. So God is putting out something's light. Putting out someone's light? Who's God gonna kill? Well, last time there was a flood, he killed everyone except Noah's family. So that kind of goes back to this idea of Noah's Ark and using this illusion to create the bigger illusion of Noah's Ark. Yeah, and God's last put out the light. This is not God's put out the light, because this is God's last put out the light, meaning that he's probably done this before. There must have been a first time in order for there to be a last time. And that first time, that was Noah's Ark. That was when he told Noah to build an ark. But this would be God's last put out the light. God's last put out the light. Well, what would happen the last time? Maybe he doesn't find a Noah. Maybe he kills everyone, and not everyone except for Noah and his family, but actually everyone. Finally calling it quits on human existence, on earth existence, and flooding us all and killing us all. The end of existence. Holy fucking shit. But it's not just saying that. It's saying there would be more than ocean water broken before God's last put out the light was spoken. Meaning, this ocean water broken, which if you haven't noticed yet, broken water, shattered water. He's referencing the beginning of his own poem. There would be more than water broken. So right now, all we have is this broken water, this shattered water. and it's going to build into something more, something that is coming, something that the water's never done to land before. There's going to be more than what's already happened. So this thing that he feels is coming in the distance, it's going to happen. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen before God kills us all. So we're going to have to live through it. God's not going to save us from this horrible thing that Frost feels is coming in the distance. This horrible thing is going to happen, and we're going to be forced to live through it. That's depressing. That is a poem full of despair and dread and uncertainty and just awfulness. Ugh. The climax of this conflict that's building and building with the waves looking over each other and over and over and over. The climax of this conflict is going to be worse than it already is, worse than we can even perceive. And going back to whose rage? So we have the allusion to Noah's Ark, and it being God's rage against humans. This age of dark intent to come before, but it's before God's last bit of life. So this is before God rages against humanity and kills us all. So this thing that we have to be prepared for, this rage, it's going to happen before God kills us all. It's going to happen before God's rage. So this is a different rage. Maybe it's not God's rage against humans. Maybe what caused God to rage against the humans last time? It was humans being awful to each other and killing each other and torturing each other, and that's what caused God to tell Noah to build the ark, because he's going to flood everything. So maybe this rage is human rage. Which human? I don't know. Which human's going to feel the wrath of the rage? I don't know. But there's going to be human conflict, and it's going to be bad. So bad. So bad, and God's not going to save us. So this poem was published in 1926. First of all, Robert Frost is an American poet. He was from America. He lived in America. Well, 1926, in America, Prohibition is happening. Prohibition in the 1920s, alcohol was illegal to sell or buy or drink in America. They outlawed alcohol, and then because it was alcohol and everyone wanted alcohol, they saw a rise in organized crime. That is when organized crime in America was at its peak, or at least it was booming at this time. It was at the highest it had ever been ever before. These crime bosses, these mafia bosses, these mobsters, they would smuggle in alcohol and they would sell them at these speakeasies, these, private secret bars. So Prohibition is happening. And you have the rise of organized crime. What's going on in 1926? Well, let's see. The Great War just ended. World War I just ended, which people, back when it just happened, did not call World War I. World War I was not named World War I until World War II broke out. Before World War II, World War I was called the Great War, the war to end all wars. That's what it was literally named. It was literally called the War to End All Wars. That's how horrific it was. It was the first mechanized war. So it was the first war with modern military technology. You have, I might be getting this wrong. You have, tear gas. You have, I think tanks were here. You have automatic weapons, more modern military technology. It's the first modern war. And it's the whole world, and it's horrible. And that just ended maybe 5-10 years ago. So that war is over, and Frost comes out with this poem. The war to end all war ends, and then years later Frost comes out with this poem talking about how the worst is yet to come. Worse than the war to end all wars? So at the end of World War I, not every problem that arose, that sparked World War I, or that arose during World War I was solved at the end of it. So you kind of have a lot of these vulnerable countries that lost World War I. You have these people whose sons and husbands and fathers and brothers were put into the war and didn't come home, came home traumatized. Maybe the governments are playing nice with each other, but the citizens, they don't necessarily want to think kindly of the citizens of another country that killed their soldiers. You also have these vulnerable countries that lost in the war and had to like pay all these fines and stuff, and you have the rise of fascism going on in Europe and Germany and Italy. The Great Depression hits in 1929 with the stock market crash of 1929, so this is published 3 years before the start of the Great Depression. So a lot is happening in 1926. A lot is about to happen. He's not wrong in saying that an age of dark intent is about to come, you know, because soon after 1926 we have the Great Depression, we have fascism rising in Europe, we have World War II, we have, after World War II, we have the Cold War, we have the Vietnam War, the Korean conflict, we have the development of atomic bombs and the nuking of Hiroshima, we have horrible, horrible death and despair going on in the 20th century. And it's really interesting that he is able to predict this. He doesn't know exactly what's going to happen. You know, it's this hazy, uncertain future. He just knows that, like, oh shit, we just had the worst war the world has ever seen, and it's not gonna get any better. This is a poem of complete despair and dread for the future. So that's this poem. It's wow. But now what I want to do is I want to actually compare this poem to some other poems. When I read this poem for the first time, the first thing that came to my mind, the immediate first thing that came to my mind was, oh, The Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy. I'll put it up on the screen if you want to pause it and read it, but I'm not going to read through the whole poem and dissect that poem. That's not what this video is about. Thomas Hardy's The Darkling Thrush was published in 1900. In the poem, the speaker describes a gloomy pastoral scene at sunset and watching a thrush, which is an English nightingale as a bird, watching this bird fly and sing. The darkling thrush can be interpreted in multiple ways, specifically because of lines 23 and 24, which say the bird had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. So the first meaning that you can interpret from this poem is that the bird is a sign of hope in a dark time. You have this very gloomy scene, this sad, depressing, lifeless sunset. It's not a pretty sunset, it's an ugly sunset, it's kind of sad, but then you have this bird that's singing and it's flinging its soul around. It's being open and vulnerable and it's flinging it onto the gloom. But the second way you can interpret this poem, or these lines, is that the bird could be just as depressed as the speaker and be choosing to die, flinging his soul onto the gloom as a sort of suicide. The poem is speaking on Hardy's fears for the new century and the growth of modernization and urbanization. You know, we're moving away from ruralness, so this rural area, you know, is supposed to be full of farmland, but now it's lifeless because everyone's moving to the cities. It's really interesting because both Frost and Hardy use nature to talk about human fears, specifically like the fear for the future, fear for uncertainty, dread for the future, things like that. Frost uses pathetic fallacy to give the waves and the shore and the cliff and the night of dark intent. It gives them all thoughts and feelings and intentions, saying that maybe nature itself, with its sentience, through this personification and pathetic fallacy, is angry at humans. Possibly saying that the rage he speaks of is not the rage of God nor the rage of humans, but the rage of nature. Or maybe nature reflecting human fear, human evilness back onto humans, back at us. You know, it's a representative of human corruptedness. Hardy uses his description of the sunset and empty land to represent human gloom, and pathetic fallacy to question why the bird sings. Why does the darkling thrush sing? The bird must be singing, the thrush must be singing because it is hopeful or because it is sad, but it cannot just be singing because it's a bird and just because birds sing. They just simply do. That can't be it. It has to have a reason for singing it. He puts these human emotions onto this bird to represent human gloom. And both of these poems feel like warnings, representations of the speaker's feelings of what is to come. Both poets in these poems also utilize poetic structure to enhance their poems. Both poems are metered. Once by the Pacific, we haven't metered this poem yet, but I'm going to talk about meter later. But this is an iambic pentameter. The darkling thrush alternates between iambic tetrameter and iambic trimeter. Once by the Pacific is a sonnet, which is a specific type of poem, composed of rhyming couplets. A couplet is 2 lines of poetry. A rhyming couplet is 2 lines of poetry that rhyme. So A, B, B, C, C, D, D. It's composed of rhyming couplets, while the darkling thrush is 4 8-line stanzas in A, B, C, D, C, D rhyme scheme. So each stanza is 8 lines, and each one has an A, B, Both poems take advantage of monosyllables, which we already talked about. Monosyllabic words, there would be more than, that's 5 monosyllabic words in a row. God's last put out the light, those are all monosyllabic. We've talked about all the ways in which these two poems are similar, but we haven't really talked about how they're different. And The Darkling Thrush was published in 1900. This was published in 1926. That's 26 years in between these two poems, almost 30 years between these two poems. And those 26 years really show in the poem's diction. Diction is your word choice. I could tell you my name in 3 different ways. I could say, hello, my name is Callie. Hi, I'm Callie. And hey, call me Callie. All 3 of those sentences say the same thing, but I'm using different words. And especially when it comes to poetry, the difference between those words is an important difference. Hardy and Frost have very different diction. Hardy describes his bird in last beruffled plume on line 22, while Frost describes his clouds as low and hairy in the skies. Frost uses much simpler everyday language, and the simpler language makes Frost's poem feel more rational and down to earth. From these 2 descriptions alone, just low and hairy in the skies and in blast beruffled plume, Hardy feels emotional and flamboyant, making the simple act of a bird singing seem more grand than it is, while Frost feels like a regular guy commenting on the world around him. Like, yeah, I saw this storm the other day. Yeah, I was at the beach at sunset, and it got pretty rough out there, and kind of spooked me, not gonna lie. He uses very different language, and also, like, when I was saying, one of the first things I do whenever I read a poem is I look for words I don't know. I know what all these words mean. I knew what all these words mean when I first read it. So, he uses a lot of simple words that the common man is going to understand. He doesn't use a bunch of sophisticated, fancy words. No SAT words are in here. It's just normal words. Can you see me? This is Schmidt. If the scenery looks different, it's dark outside, that's because my camera battery died, and then I got hungry and bored, so then I ate food, and then I procrastinated because I forgot about doing this. Oh, this is so... My camera's out of focus. I actually never checked the focus on any of this footage, so I'm just gonna hope that it is somewhat in focus the whole time, because if it's not, I'm gonna cry. Once by the Pacific reminds me a lot of The Darkling Thrush. Thomas Hardy is talking about feeling dread for the future, feeling uncertain about what's to come, thinking that the future is going to be bleak and bad, and he was also pretty right about it, because the poem was published in 1900, which was right before the Great War, the war to end all wars. And he was like, guys, this future looks pretty bleak. I don't know. This bird, this is either a sign of hope or a bad omen. And then, like, 10 years later, war to end all wars broke out. I just find it really interesting that, like, 20, almost 30 years later, Frost can be writing a poem about that exact same fear and that exact same dread, and I don't know, I just feel like it connects them a lot, which I think is really cool, because, like, Thomas wrote his poem, like, 20 years before this. Thomas Hardy was an English poet. I could be wrong about that. He was a UK poet, British. He was a British Isles poet, while Frost is American, and he's from the US. and so they're separated by land, they're separated by 20 years, 25 years, and they still end up feeling the same things. And I don't know, it just makes me feel very connected to the world. And also, they're both really good poems written by really good writers. I love Thomas Hardy, and I also love Frost, and I think it's just a fun connection because it was like the first thing that I thought of when I first read this poem. I was like, oh, this reminds me so much of The Dark Flesh. I think we left off when I was going to talk about meter. So meter is like the rhythm of words. It is the series of stressed and unstressed syllables. A good example of stressed and unstressed is water. Do you say water or do you say water? You say water, water. So it's stressed, unstressed. And for stressed, you do a little, I don't know which way the diagonal goes, I'm going to do it this way. And then you can either do an X, I do U's. Unstressed. Stressed, unstressed. Water, not water, water. That's how you say water. And meter in poetry is just the series of stressed and unstressed syllables. One specific is in iambic pentameter. So, what these two words mean is iambic means the meter is composed of iambs, which is a type of meter unit, and pentameter means 5 meter, meaning that there are 5 units per line. So, there are different types of meter units. Iambs are one of them. There's other ones. I'm not going to name them all because I don't remember the names of them all, and my poetry teacher's going to be really mad at me about that, but it's fine. And those will give off different rhythms. Like a stressed unstressed goes da 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 da, and then an unstressed stress goes like da 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 da, and then like a stressed unstressed goes like da 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 da, stuff like that. But this is written in iambic pentameter, which means it uses iambs. One iamb, the B is silent, is unstressed, stressed. And pentameter, we said, is 5 units of meter. So that means that there are 5 iambs per line, meaning that there are 5 sets of unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed per line. That's what that means. So this is an iambic pentameter, which means unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. Be shattered, water made a misty din. And it's like that throughout the whole poem. I'm not doing the whole thing. I don't remember why I started talking about meter. It's been a few hours. Fun fact, Shakespeare wrote primarily in iambic pentameter. Almost every single thing that he wrote was in iambic pentameter. His sonnets, his plays, his everything. The weird thing about that, we're going to talk about this more later, but I want you to keep in your head Shakespeare, okay? We have an allusion to Othello, Shakespeare's play. We have iambic pentameter, which Shakespeare is famous for writing almost exclusively in. And this poem is a sonnet, which Shakespeare is very famous for his sonnets. He wrote a lot of them. He wrote so many of them that they actually named a type of sonnet after him, the Shakespearean sonnet. We will get into it later. Yeah, I don't remember why I was talking about meter. I probably should have listened to what I was saying before this, but I just straight up don't remember what I was saying. Okay, I went back and I remembered what I was going to say. So I was talking about how Frost uses a lot of everyday language and how I know what all these words mean because I have a big brain. How that's really interesting and cool because he uses this like really complex poem, which doesn't seem super complex because he uses a lot of simple words and like we all understood what all these words mean. But then it has like all of these layers of meaning peeling back underneath it. And I was going to talk about meter because this poem is written in iambic pentameter, which, yes, relates back to Shakespeare, but also, fun fact about iambic pentameter, the reason why Shakespeare wrote in it so much and the reason why it's so popular and common is because native English speakers or fluent English speakers kind of just naturally speak in iambic pentameter. Not every single thing we say is going to be in iambic pentameter, but if you start to take note of what you say and how you say it and try to meter it, you'll realize that a lot of what you say is actually in iambic pentameter. And it just sounds really nice on the ear because of that, because we're so used to it. Like, yeah, I could like over exaggerate the stresses and unstresses to make the metering make sense. Like, The shattered water made a misty din. But, you know, this still works as unstressed stressed even when I'm saying it normally. The shattered water made a misty din. That is still an iambic pentameter. It's not because I said it differently, it's because that's how we speak. The shattered water made a misty din. It sounds normal, but it's also in iambic pentameter. So going back to this idea of like everyday speech, not only in the actual diction that he chose, but also in like the speech patterns themselves of iambic pentameter. So that's just interesting that I wanted to talk about. So now we're going to move on to a different poem that this poem reminds me of. This poem is designed by Robert Frost. It's another Robert Frost poem. It's another sonnet. It's another Robert Frost sonnet, and it's called Design. This is not a video about design, so I'm not going to read it, but I'll put it up on the screen and you can pause it if you want. So Design is a poem that was published in 1922. Frost is very famous for doing this thing where he takes a small microcosmic event and uses it to make a statement or infer something about the larger picture and the larger world. Like in this poem, Frost uses this smaller image of a man standing on a beach and witnessing a storm brew one night, and uses that to talk about a larger sense of dread and the fear and uncertainty of the rising global tensions in the world and following the aftermath of World War I and leading up to the Great Depression and World War II. To feed my cat, my cats are on two different medications. My cats are on two different foods right now because Basil had a major surgery. He's been like really sick all summer, and we've spent so much money in vet bills, and he's now on a prescription food that he has to stay on for the rest of his life. It costs so much money. But Schmidt is not on that prescription food, and I don't want to have to buy double because it's super expensive. And also Schmidt only eats dry food. He only eats dry food, he doesn't eat wet food. But the thing is that if I leave the dry food out for Schmidt, Basil will eat the dry food as well, and he's not supposed to eat that, or else I'm gonna have to go back to the vet hospital and spend even more money. So I have to like hide the food from Basil and just feed Schmidt periodically, which is really annoying. Because he's not used to that, I'm not used to that, and sometimes I'm gone all day. And so no one gets fed, and it's really hard when they're like, I need food every like 3 hours, and I'm like, I'm in another place, not here. So that's kind of annoying, but we're figuring it out. Anyways, Once by the Pacific uses this smaller image of a man standing on a beach watching a storm one night, and uses that to talk about the dread he feels for the future, the uncertainty of the future, these much bigger, big brain, expansive ideas, all from this one scene. Robert is very famous for that. I'm going to call him Robert because I can. He's dead. He doesn't care. He also does it in his poem Design. Design is about the speaker going on a walk or something and witnessing this white spider hiding and being camouflaged on this white flower, and then this white moth coming up to this white flower being like, ooh, pretty flower, and then this white moth sits on the flower but doesn't see the white spider because it's camouflaged, and then gets eaten by the spider. That's what it's about. You know, the thing about the flower in this is that it's not just any flower. It's a white heal-all flower. And heal-all flowers are blue. They're not white, they're blue. A white heal-all flower is an albino heal-all flower. So this isn't just, oh, a spider was on a flower and a moth flew by. No, this is a albino spider was sitting on an albino flower, and then an albino moth came up to this scene and sat on the flower and then was killed and eaten. So it's like three rare beings in nature that have come together to create this gruesome scene of a moth being killed and eaten. I'll quote a little bit of the second stanza. Oh, that's not a little bit, that's just the entire second stanza. I'm not going to read the whole thing out loud, but I'm gonna have this on the screen so you can read it, and I'm just going to read the last two sentences. That's the second stanza, lines 9 through 14 of Design. What brought the kindred spider to that height, and steered the white moth thither in the night? What but design of darkness to appall? Design govern in a thing so small. The poem's called Design, and in the end he talks about what but design of darkness So this poem, Design, is about this idea of intelligent design. Intelligent design is this argument for God's existence, for the existence of a higher power. It's this argument that nature is designed. Nothing in nature is a coincidence. It was all made specifically to be that way. It was all intentionally and meticulously crafted to be exactly the way it is. And the only way it would be that way is if a higher power designed it to be that way. And bringing that back to Once by the Pacific, he talks about a night of dark intent. Dark intent. This is not, this thing, this rage that that someone needs to prepare for, this storm that's brewing. It is a night of dark intent. This is not on accident. It's intentional. It's with intent. It is dark because it was made to be dark. It is this awful and terrifying and violent and horrible because it was made to be that way. It is full of rage and anger because it is intentionally full of rage and anger. This will be a designed and intentional doom. Who designed it to be this way? And I guess that kind of goes back into whose rage do we need to prepare for, and what or who exactly does the water represent. Anyways, I wanted to bring up Design because I thought it was interesting that Design was published in 1922. This is 1926. 4 years later, he is still feeling this dread. I talked about it. I forgot what else I was going to say. I think I had another point, but I only came up with it like this morning when I was ranting to myself everything, when I was reading back the script, and instead of just reading the script or getting out the camera and filming, I instead decided to pretend like I was filming and explain everything, but not actually do the filming. And I came up with this idea about Design that I was like, oh my god, that's how it connects, and da-da-da-da. I don't remember what it is. So we're just going to move on. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the structure of this poem. We've kind of gotten a little bit into that with it being, it's 14 lines. We did the rhyme scheme. We figured out it was iambic pentameter. Well, I knew it was iambic. I told you it was in iambic pentameter. But we haven't really dived in. I'm not an English major, though I am a perspective. We're not going to talk about it. Why'd you bring it up? That's actually really rude of you, and you shouldn't ask people such personal questions when you don't know who they are. Go fuck yourself. Do you even know my middle name? No, you don't. You're a piece of trash. I've been looking at myself in the video. In the back of the camera where you can flip it out so you can see yourself. I've been looking at that this whole time, and I'm now looking directly in the camera lens, and I feel like it's weird. It's going to be weird when I find that I'm just looking at myself the whole time. I'm going to keep looking at myself because I like looking at myself. So remember before when I said this poem kind of tackles this idea of uncertainty for the future, but even more so breaking tradition. Thought of doing the waves thought of doing something to the shore that water never did to land before. Never did it to land before. This is something that's never been done. It's thinking of breaking tradition. And the structure of this poem really drives that home. So, it's a sonnet, written in iambic pentameter. I already explained that. But Shakespeare, who is alluded to in the poem, famously wrote many sonnets, and pretty much everything he wrote, sonnets, plays, etc., was exclusively in iambic pentameter, almost exclusively. Now, sonnets are a very old type of poem. Shakespeare was writing them all the way in, I don't know when Shakespeare was alive. I think it's the 1400s. I think he was alive in I need to look up when Shakespeare was alive because that puts Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492 in a whole new perspective for me. He was not alive in 1492. He was born in 1564, so he was alive in the late 1500s. I was about 100 years off, it's fine. He was alive in the 1500s, and even by then, sonnets were let me also look up when sonnets became a thing. Don't you love how I've done research for this video? Okay, Pressbooks.pub says that the sonnet is thought to have been invented in Italy in the 13th century, which would have been the 1200s. Wikipedia says the same thing. So, it's from the 1200s. So by the time Shakespeare was writing it, it was already 300 years old, okay? It was already old as fuck. How old is America? It was already about as old as America is by the time Shakespeare started writing his own sonnets, okay? It was old as fuck by then. It's even older as fuck now. It's in the 1200s. Holy shit, it's been a full millennium. No, it hasn't. Yes, it has. No, it hasn't. No. Because the 1200s, yeah. It's been a full millennium since the sonnet was invented. Happy 1000th birthday. Oh my god, you didn't tell me it was your birthday. Brought me a birthday gift to my birthday on my birthday party of my birthday gift? Okay, anyways, the sonnet is old as fuck. They have a few rules to them though. First rule, 14 lines. Second rule, I'm not going to talk about the second rule yet because I said I would save it for later. They have very specific structures, being 14 lines. They tend to have specific rhyme schemes depending on what type of sonnet it is. The poems are traditionally written about specific themes, usually like love or valor. But there are three main types of sonnets. Okay, there's the Italian sonnet, also called the Petrarchan sonnet. And the Petrarchan sonnet is usually broken up into two sections. A lot of these sonnets are broken up into sections, but they can also just be one stanza like this. Any type of sonnet can also just be one stanza. The breaking up in groups are more so for this thing called a volta, which I'm going to explain later, and the rhyme scheme. That's usually how it is. Like if it's one stanza, it can still be broken up because the rhyme scheme changes or the volta's there. I'll talk about a volta later. But there's the Italian sonnet, which is usually split up into two sections, even if it's just one stanza. And that is the first 8 lines and then the bottom 6 lines. An octave and a sestet. Octave means a stanza with 8 lines of poetry, and a sestet means a stanza with 6 lines of poetry. That's what that means. And the rhyme scheme is usually for the first 8, A, B, B, A, B, B, A. So A, B, B, A, B, B, A. And then for the bottom 6, some combination of C, D, and E. Maybe C, D, E, C, D, E, C, D, C, C, D, C. Then there are the English sonnets. And there are 2 types of English sonnets that we're going to talk about today. There is the Spenserian sonnet, which has English sonnets are usually broken up to, so Italian, 8 and 6. English, both types of English ones, the Shakespearean and the Spenserian, are broken up into 12 lines and 2 lines, the bottom 2 being a couplet. And for the rhyme schemes of the different ones, it's broken down even further, but that's like for the rhyme scheme. Usually an English sonnet will either be 1 stanza like this, 2 stanzas, 1 of 12 lines and 1 of 2 lines, or 4 stanzas, 3 of 4 lines, so 3 quatrains. Quatrain is 4 lines of poetry. So 3 stanzas that are all 4 lines long, and then 1 stanza that's 2. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's usually how they're broken down. And Spenserian sonnet has an interlocking rhyme scheme. Interlocking meaning it's A, B, A, B for the first quatrain. In the second quatrain, it'd be B, C, B, C. So the B from the first quatrain and the B from the second quatrain linked. It carries over. So that's why it's called interlocking, because it links into the next quatrain. A, B, A, B, B, C, B, C, C, D, C, D, and then the bottom 2, E, E. So it changes there. You have E, E. That's a rhyming couplet at the end instead of these interlocking every other lines. And a rhyming couplet at the end of a sonnet is called a heroic couplet. And then a Shakespearean sonnet also has that heroic couplet at the end, because it's usually broken up into 12 and 2, because the volta, I'll talk about the volta in a second. The Shakespearean sonnet rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. Same heroic couplet at the end, but no interlocking rhyme scheme. That was a lot of long-windedness. But it explains a lot of necessary things for us to now talk about the structure of Once by the Pacific.
Later, but I want you to keep in your head Shakespeare, okay? We have an allusion to Othello, we have iambic pentameter, and this poem is a sonnet, which Shakespeare is very famous for his sonnets. He wrote a lot of them. He wrote so many of them that they actually named a type of sonnet after him, the Shakespearean sonnet.
You're kind of expecting a Shakespearean sonnet. You know it's a sonnet, so you're expecting the normal rules of a sonnet, period, But then on top of that, you have all of these little references to Shakespeare, so you kind of not just expect a sonnet, you expect a Shakespearean sonnet. And we just went over the rhyme scheme of a Shakespearean sonnet. It's A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. Now let's look at the rhyme scheme of Once by the Civic. We already wrote it down. A, A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, E. That's not the Shakespearean rhyme scheme. Instead of doing these every other line rhymes and ending on a heroic couplet, Frost just does a series of rhyming couplets, which traditionally a rhyming couplet in a sonnet is saved for the last two lines, the heroic couplet, the end of the sonnet. But here it's repeated over and over and over and over again. Heroic couplet, heroic couplet, heroic couplet, heroic couplet. Like the end is coming and coming and coming and coming. Great waves looked over, others coming in. This one, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one. With each new couplet, the end is closer. Pretty cool, right? Reading is fun. And now we're going to talk about the volta. So the volta is this thing where basically a shift happens in a poem. Most sonnets have voltas. If they don't, they're a little funky. But basically it's a shift in the poem for when the first part of the poem, the speaker is saying one thing, and in the second part of the poem, they're saying another thing. Usually it's some kind of shift in perspective, like for example, in the first section of the poem, the speaker is going like, oh, these are all the reasons why I like this thing, this is why the subject of this poem is so great and awesome and I love it. And then in the second part of the poem, it's like, and here's all the reason why it makes me sad. Here's all the reason why it sucks ass. No, it's still talking about the same subject, the same thing. It's just giving two different perspectives on the thing. Painting this subject in a good light, painting it in a bad light. Kind of like there's this shift. That's just an example. It can be a lot of different things, but as long as there's this like shift in perspective, you know, that's usually where the volta is. And in the Italian sonnets, the volta is usually in between lines 8 and 9. So you have 8 lines and 6 lines. Between line 8 and 9. I've understood the volta as not being line 9. If this is where the volta is, okay, I've understood it as the volta is the space between lines 8 and 9, because by the time line 9 starts, the volta, the shift has already happened or is already happening. Usually in an Italian sonnet, that's where the volta is. If it's an English sonnet, the volta's down here, between lines 12 and 13. You have 12 and you have 2, and that's why you have the heroic couplet. You have these every other line rhymes, A, B, A, B. You have a B between the two A's, but then at the end you have GG, this heroic couplet at the end. That's 2 lines of rhyme right after each other. It's because not only is there a shift in the perspective of what the poem's talking about, there's also a shift in the rhyme scheme. It's no longer this every other line, it's now 2 lines together. That's why you have this heroic couplet at the end. Now, where is the volta in Once by the Pacific? I think there are 3 possibilities of where the volta is. The first possibility is that the volta is down here, between lines 12 and 13, just like a regular English sonnet. I also think the volta could be here, between lines 9 and 10. The third option is that the sonnet has 2 voltas, and it's both here and here. Robert Frost was a modernist poet, and modernist poets were pretentious dicks who thought they were really clever and better than everyone else. And also they liked to play with form and structure a lot. So during the modernist period, which is like the 1880s to like the 1950s, roughly, you have a lot of modern poets experimenting with form and experimenting with the sonnet. Instead of a 14-line sonnet, they might have a 15-line sonnet, a 13-line sonnet. They might have the volta Over here, up here, they might have 2 voltas. They play a lot with it at that time, and Frost is a man of his time, because look at the poem he wrote. But, those are the 3 options, I think. Between lines 12 and 13, between lines 9 and 10, and both between lines 9 and 10 and 12 and 13. The volta could be after line 12, between lines 12 and 13. After line 12, because that's when the speaker starts talking about God specifically. We can kind of get some things about God up here. Someone to be prepared for rage, talking about nature, being angry, maybe Mother Nature, God. But it's not until the very last line that he actually says the word God. Frost also writes line 13, there would be more than ocean water broken, which goes back to this image of shattered water. So he's kind of returning full circle at this very end. He starts with shattered water, he ends with water broken. And not only does he end with water broken, but he ends with more than water broken. Okay? So he starts with just the shattered water made a misty den, and that's it. And now he's saying, there's going to be more than that. There's more than this broken water. Here there's just broken water. Here is more than the broken water. Okay, it's kind of seeing this water in a new perspective, where this is it. The water is shattered and broken up here. But now it's different. Now it's like, oh, it's going to be more than that. It's not just going to be this night of dark intent. It's going to be this age. Oh, okay. The other place where I think the volta is between lines 9 and 10. Now, that is not where normal sonnets put their volta. They put it down here, or they put it after line 8, between lines 8 and 9. I think it's after line 9, between lines 9 and 10. Now, I do think that, after line 12, there is a bit of a shift there. It could totally work there. And I think there also could totally be 2 voltas. But personally, I like the volta being after line 9 the most. I think it makes the most sense. It makes my brain happy, and that's what I think. And I also think it's really cool because he's kind of, again, playing with our expectations of where the volta should be, because it's a sonnet, and even more so because he's Shakespeare, maybe even copying not just a sonnet, but an English sonnet. I think the volta is after line 9, because in the first 9 lines, Frost is talking about this literal, physical storm brewing on the beach. Shattered water, misty den. He's talking about the actual waves looking over the other waves and actually crashing and shattering on the sand. He's talking about the clouds literally being low and hairy. He's talking about the speaker literally standing there and feeling like the shore is lucky by being backed by cliff. He's literally talking about a storm that he saw once by the Pacific. But then, on line 10, he broadens this literal physical image to a more metaphorical night. It's no longer this literal storm, this literal night of dark intent. It's now this metaphorical storm, this metaphorical night of dark intent, this age of dark intent. The shore was lucky, the cliff too, in being backed by continent. And then immediately, it looked as if a night of dark intent was coming, and not only a night of age. He immediately goes straight into, this is not just a literal storm. This is also a metaphorical storm, because this storm's bad, but honestly, our entire future's bad and hazy. And that's when he starts going into it, and that's why I think it's there. I think it also works for line 12, but I think the line 9 one is stronger. I think the one after line 9 is stronger, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. So, putting the structure of this poem, which we already know subverts our expectations with an uncommon rhyme scheme, and a vague sense of where the volta is, and if we are going to go with the strongest sense of where the volta is, it's in an odd and unexpected place. Going with the idea of breaking tradition, doing something that's never been done before. This is not just, the water doing something to land that it's never done to land before. This is Frost doing something to a sonnet that's never been done to sonnets before. okay? That's really cool. That's really cool how he plays the form in that way to strengthen the theme of what he's trying to say. That's quality craftsmanship. Frost is bringing in the new age, breaking the tradition of the things that have been done to land before, and breaking the tradition of what's been done to sonnets before, bringing in this new age, this new dark age, not just in the words of the poems itself, but in the actual structure, the actual physical, tangible poem itself. And also the poem subverting our expectations of a sonnet kind of gives the reader this sense of unease, leaving us wondering what to expect from the next line, from the rest of the poem. We're like, oh, it's a sonnet? Okay, it should be A-B, because no matter what type of sonnet we've talked about so far, no matter which type it is, the first two lines, the rhyme scheme is A-B. A-B-B-A, A-B-A-B, it's always A-B. He comes in with A-A. It's like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. Well, next is supposed to be another A, or maybe a B. It's a B. Okay, well then it's either an A. I don't know what to expect next. I'm uncomfortable. The future of me, the future is hazy and uncertain because I don't know what to expect from this poem. He doesn't know what to expect from this storm. He doesn't know whose rage it is, and he doesn't know who should be prepared. Just someone. Anyone's rage. Any person needs to be prepared for anyone's rage. I don't know who. Someone for someone's rage. I don't know who. We don't know what to expect. I don't know if it's going to be an A or a B or a C or a F or a... I don't know. He's creating this sense of unease and uncertainty in the actual structure, in the actual rhyme scheme. Plus, rhymes are creepy. You know? What's that one cry? Like, you've ever heard like a child's nursery rhyme, slow down? That's creepy. It's creepy. Every horror movie ever has a slowed down child's nursery rhyme. And you want to know what that is? It's a rhyme. Rhymes are creepy, which gives us this sense of unease and dread and the uncertainty of not knowing what's coming next, and also the uncertainty of not knowing where the volta is or where it's supposed to be. And you're just, oh, I'm so confused because I'm trying you're subverting my expectations. He breaks away from our expectations and leaves the reader unsure of what to expect, making the poem seem off from what it should be, which goes back into the sense of dread the poem is conveying through the words. It showcases the sense of unease for the future, the dread for what's to come that the speaker feels. It's the same dread that he feels seeing those rough waves, the same dread that the rough waves gives him for the storm, the same dread that makes us scared for what rhyme's going to come next, or where we should expect a volta and a shift in perspective. And when he does shift perspective, it's not going from my example of all the things I like to all the things I hate, or all the things I hate to all the things I like. It's going from one scary thing, a rough storm at sea, where like maybe a tsunami happens, probably not in North America, but maybe a tsunami happens, maybe a flood happens, maybe a hurricane happens. That can destroy people's lives. People can drown, And then instead of going like, oh, but it's okay, he goes, no, and it's only going to get worse, and God's not going to save you from it. You are doomed. But yeah, it's a really interesting poem, and I am in love with this poem. And I kind of fell into love with it, because at first I was just like, oh, that's kind of cool, it reminds me of this other poem. And then I had to write my final paper for my modern poetry class, and it had to be on the entire class, and it could only be 5 pages, which was absolute fucking torture, because I had 8 pages alone written on this one poem, and I was like, this poem did not take us the entire semester. How am I going to write 5 pages on the entire semester when I'm writing 8 pages just on this one poem? My notes, now that I've actually been able to flesh them fully out, this was 10 pages worth of notes. And I wasn't just doing bullet points. I was writing full-on fucking paragraphs. 8 pages. No, 10 pages. This is like full 10 pages worth of notes. Single-spaced. yeah, I wrote a fuck ton on this because I just have a lot to say on it because I really like it and it's really cool and there's a lot to dive into because a lot of modern poetry specifically, there's a lot to dive into, but also just poetry in general. But this is a poem I really like that I just needed to get off of my chest. If you like this video, leave a comment, recommend a poem for me to review. I don't know. Say whether or not you also liked this poem, whether or not you think I'm whack, where you think the Volta is. I don't know. Yeah. I kind of want to do more poetry ones, though I'm kind of thinking that in the future if I do another poetry one, I'm not going to do a poem that I've already analyzed, because I already had 10 pages of notes going into this, right? I kind of think that if I do another one, or my next one, I'm going to do a poem that I haven't already analyzed, and I'm going to kind of analyze it on camera so you guys can like see how I go about learning poems. If you're interested in that, let me know. Subscribe, because it costs you zero money to do so, and it literally does not affect your life if you do. It's not like you're going to be on email notifications unless you have YouTube email notifications, because I don't know why you would have that. That's weird. Does YouTube send you email notifications? Mine doesn't do that. I don't know how you would get it to do that. Subscribe if you want to see my cats, because if you don't, then you're not allowed to see them anymore. Okay, bye.